The fall of the Roman Empire, one of the greatest and most complex empires in human history, cannot be attributed to a single cause. This process, which lasted for centuries, was the result of a series of events, political shifts, and social changes that ultimately led to its collapse. The empire, which began as a small republic in central Italy and grew to dominate much of the known world, achieved incredible power and glory. However, as Rome reached its peak, internal problems began to surface, and signs of weakness in its political and social structures became evident. From the late 2nd century AD, Rome entered a period of crises and significant transformations. The empire was embroiled in internal conflicts, corruption, and economic troubles. Roman soldiers, once famed for their bravery and loyalty, were increasingly drawn from foreign tribes and territories within the empire rather than from the Roman people themselves. As a result, their loyalty and motivation toward the empire were questioned, weakening the military. Additionally, the vast borders of the empire, which had expanded endlessly, required constant protection and management. This drained the empire's resources and made it less able to respond effectively to external threats, especially from the barbarian tribes pressing on its borders. Throughout Rome's history, external forces such as Hannibal of Carthage, the Goths, and other invading tribes exerted immense pressure on the empire's territories. However, what truly threatened Rome was not just these foreign enemies, but also the internal decay of the empire itself. By the late 4th century AD, particularly after weak and ineffective emperors took the throne, the Western Roman Empire was in a state of constant decline. From this point on, much of the fighting occurred not against foreign enemies, but in the form of political struggles and power struggles within the empire. These internal upheavals led to increasing pressure on Rome's borders from barbarian invasions. As foreign threats intensified and internal weaknesses grew, Rome became increasingly unable to defend itself. In 410 AD, the Visigoths under Alaric sacked Rome, marking the first time in history that the city had been looted. This event signaled the decline of the empire's once great power and authority. Even so, the empire still existed in some form, particularly in the east, where the Byzantine Empire, with its capital in Constantinople, continued to thrive. But the question remains, was the fall of the Western Roman Empire inevitable? Did internal failures, corruption, and internal strife inevitably lead to this collapse? Or was it a result of the empire's inability to adapt to new challenges? Some historians argue that despite the internal decay, the empire could have continued and even been revived with better leadership. However, others maintain that this collapse was unavoidable, as the internal weaknesses of Rome and the increasing pressure from external forces made it impossible for the empire to sustain itself. One of the most significant factors in Rome's downfall was its inability to adapt to the changing world. While other empires and civilizations were evolving and creating new systems of governance, Rome clung to its old systems, which had become increasingly ineffective. The empire's administrative and political structures, once effective, were no longer able to meet the demands of the vast and diverse territories it ruled. Additionally, the economic power of Rome, which had once supported its military might, began to wane, undermining its ability to defend itself against external threats. Many historians point to the division of the empire into the eastern and western halves in 395 AD as a turning point in the weakening of the Western Roman Empire. This division meant that the resources and manpower of the empire were no longer evenly distributed, and the Western Empire was left increasingly vulnerable. While the Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to thrive, the Western Empire could not cope with the internal crises and external invasions that were tearing it apart. Despite the fall of Rome, the story of Rome did not end there. The Byzantine Empire, which carried on the legacy of Rome in the East, remained a powerful force in the Mediterranean world for centuries. Under emperors like Justinian, the Byzantines even managed to regain some of the lost territories of the Western Empire. However, the Byzantine Empire itself eventually fell, with the capture of Constantinople by the Ottoman Empire in 1453, marking the end of the Roman Empire's long reign. But what ultimately led to Rome's fall? Was it the internal corruption, civil wars, and leadership failures that led to its downfall? Or was the empire doomed from the start? Some historians argue that the decline of the empire was a result of a series of misguided decisions, particularly the division of the empire into two parts. This decision weakened the Western Empire and made it less able to respond to external threats. Others maintain that the internal flaws of Rome, particularly its inability to adapt to new challenges, ultimately led to its collapse. Regardless of the cause, the fall of the Western Roman Empire remains one of the most significant events in human history, shaping the course of Europe and the Mediterranean for centuries to come. The fall of Rome, whether inevitable or not, reshaped the world in ways that continue to affect us today. It serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of internal decay, external pressures, and the inability to adapt to a changing world. The legacy of Rome lives on, but the lessons of its downfall remain as relevant as ever.